Tron. That's what I was waiting for. So we are live and recording. Thanks for being here this evening. My name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Financial Assistance and Student Employment at the University of Miami. It is my privilege to be here tonight representing the Broward Educational Foundation and talking about FAFSA and the FAFSA process. Just to give you a little bit of background for me, I'm a financial aid professional who has about 35 years of experience working in college financial aid at a lot of different institutions, from open access public institutions, or like for example, Valencia College here in Central Florida, where I was assistant vice president of financial aid, to limited access, highly selective institutions. So I was director of financial aid at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And my goal tonight is really not to speak for any particular institution, but more to talk about the application process for FAFSA and to give you some good information to make sure that you are ready to complete the FAFSA if you've not done it already. And you learn a little bit about how the FAFSA process works and what it is that the Department of Education is looking for. I want to back up and say again a welcome on behalf of the Broward Educational Foundation. There are a number of staff who are supporting our presentation tonight behind the scenes. You may hear from them in the chat, or you may see them answering your questions as we go through this evening. Just a couple of notes as we do begin. So please feel free to ask any question you have using the Q&A button. If you type your question into the Q&A, we will answer it either publicly or privately, depending upon the nature of your question. The chat really is reserved for us to reach out to you with links or other pieces of information that we offer. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We will see them there. Number two, we are recording this session, so please feel free to take notes, but if you feel like you missed something or you want to go back to something, we will get you a copy of the recording at some point tonight or tomorrow, along with links to the pages that I'll talk about this evening. So again, feel free to just sit back and relax and learn a little bit about the FAFSA. We have blocked 2 hours. I'm going to tell you right up front, it is not 2 hours. We've been running about an hour 15 total. That gives you time for your questions as well. And we will, again, take time at the end to answer your questions as we go through. So with that, this is our family FAFSA training. And let's talk a little bit about sort of what we're doing and why. And, really, I guess I should start with what is the FAFSA, right? What does FAFSA completion even matter this year? What's been the struggle for families and why it's not too late to be part of the solution and to make a difference? So, FAFSA, as you may know, is the free application for federal student aid. And it is the main application that is used for students attending college and university to apply for financial aid. It's the same application that you might use as an 18-year-old going to college for the first time, or I might use if I'm going back as a 50 something year old. I won't give you my age, but a 50 something year old going back to school who's looking for a graduate degree. I would also fill out the FAFSA. It's one form that is used at every institution in the country for eligibility for federal financial aid. But it is more than that. It also gets access to state financial aid for many state programs, for many institutions and their financial aid, and also for private scholarships and other access points that might use FAFSA as their starting point. So, a couple of things I wanted to share on this first slide. This statistic is really important. Seniors in high school who complete their FAFSA are 84% more likely to immediately enroll in college. And what we know and why this will become important is that this year we've had some challenges with our seniors in high school in getting their FAFSAs completed. And that's why we're offering this webinar late in the summer to really help late in our cycle, help make a difference for families who might have missed their opportunity to complete their FAFSA. And in case you think, well, I'm not going to qualify, all I qualify for is loans. Why would I complete a FAFSA? We earn too much. Those are common misconceptions that families have. And I want to share again from this slide on the chart you're looking at now that there is over $177 billion with a B available in undergraduate financial aid in 21-22. The number's gone up since then, but that's the last year we have good detail on. And common misconception is that most of that money is in the form of loans. I want to show you, based on the pie chart, that about 60% of the money available for undergraduate financial aid is available in the form of grants and scholarships. About a third is available in loans. It is true that loans do represent a significant portion, but not a majority of the funding available. There's 5% in tax benefits and 1% in work awards. The other thing I'll show you is, and this is another common misconception, is that most of the grant money that's available for undergraduates comes from the federal government. If you look at the chart, you will see that 30% of the grants that are available actually come from institutions. So those are colleges and universities that are really contributing to help support their students. And by completing the FAFSA, you have begun your access point to get into the FAFSA piece. So let's talk through again, how do we go through, how do we answer your questions, and how do we get this information in? So in a typical year, typically on October 1st of a student's high school senior year, the FAFSA would go live and you'd start applying as early as October 1. Um, and again, some students might complete the FAFSA only. Others might do other applications as well. You may have heard of something called the CSS profile, which is a secondary application for some private schools, or other schools may have their own applications that they use for financial aid and financial assistance, like a scholarship application. This is a typical year. And then typically aid offers would be prepared and sent, usually with the admissions decisions, so students would have a chance to make their decision all at once. This year, however, has been anything but typical. So just to talk through sort of some of what we've seen this year and why we've seen the issues we've seen. First, I should say that this year there was a rewrite of the entire federal financial aid system, soup to nuts, literally a complete rewrite of the application process and how the process worked. And there are two reasons for that. One of which is, and they're both laws, one of which was the Future Act passed in 2019, and the second is the FAFSA Simplification Act passed in 2020. This required reprogramming of the entire FAFSA computer system and redeployment of the entire application. Originally, this was targeted actually last year for 23-24 for students going to college in 23-24, but the Department of Education asked Congress for a delay, and 24-25 has been the first year of this new FAFSA. And not to belabor this or to go through every single thing that went wrong, but I wanted to share just so you had a sense of some of the issues that people have faced this year. The launch date, which was usually October 1, got delayed to December 30th, sort of. There was about 30 minutes you could apply on December 30th. There was no data shared with schools until mid-March. There were some errors on the back end. There were some badly written questions. And so as a part of all of this, right, you may have been discouraged, or students that you know or others may have been discouraged about completing a FAFSA. And so there's been a huge national impact of this year. And you can see these charts come from NCAN. And you may ask, why am I sharing these data with you? I want you to understand the context as a whole before we dive into your FAFSA. And I'm also going to invite you, after you do your own FAFSA, to help us help others get their FAFSAs complete. And I'm going to give you a cash incentive actually to do that. So nationwide, the impact has been that we're about 11 to 12% down from where we would normally be this time of year. So if you look, about 52% at this point of graduating seniors have completed a FAFSA. That was last year's number. This year, it's only at 44.7%. So that's about a 12.4% reduction. And this varies state by state. If you want to check your state out, if your state is not listed, you can go to ncan.org. I'll highlight for the state of Florida because that's where I'm sitting at the moment. Out of the 50 states, Florida is 49th. By the way, I love that there are 52 states, but that's because they've included Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. But still, we are 49th in terms of the rank of seniors completing their FAFSA. Only about a third of our graduating seniors have completed the FAFSA. Remember, as I said last year at this time, nationwide, it was closer to 52 or 53%. Florida also has the unpleasant distinction of being in the bottom 10 or bottom 11 for our year-over-year change, right? And so we're doing something about that. And what I want to talk about is sort of what do we do about it? Well, so in partnership with the federal government and through a grant funded by federal student aid, Broward Educational Foundation, Bridge to Life, has partnered with me to offer a series of workshops to help families this summer to make sure that you get your FAFSA completed. And a couple of notes. Number one, it is not too late to apply for fall financial aid. I know a lot of people have thought, well, it's too late. I can't get it done at this point. It's not too late. Fall is still available for financial aid. And some students may have just written off college attendance altogether and said, well, if I can't get my aid together, I'm just not going to be able to make it to college. It's not too late to apply for fall admission. Many of our community colleges or state colleges, which are great institutions, are open access institutions and are still taking applications for the fall. So it is not too late to apply for fall admission. If you have written off fall as a student and you want to think about spring, there are a lot of institutions that have spring term admission as well, and it's the same FAFSA that you would do to get access to spring admission. So even if you haven't yet applied for admission, or maybe you have plans for the fall, you took a full-time job, if you're a student or you're doing something else, think about spring as a possibility as well. And it might be the case that you've already enrolled, but you've just given up on getting any financial aid. And again, what I'll say about that is even if you're enrolled already, it is not too late to complete the FAFSA. So what I want to do is I want to actually, with that in mind, go through and walk through the FAFSA with you tonight. And so what you will see in the PowerPoint that I'm about to start, this is a walkthrough of the FAFSA and some slides. We'll share with you what it looks like when you do your FAFSA application. We're going to go through a normal FAFSA application cycle so that you're prepared for what you will see when you complete the application. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A, and our panel will take a look at those and answer them for you as we go. This PowerPoint is 312 slides. We will not go through all of them, or else I would keep you here until tomorrow morning. But if you want a copy of the presentation as a whole, it's available, and I'll give you the website for that. You can actually take a look and see the whole PowerPoint presentation. We're going to focus on one process, and that is the student does their section, and then the parent does their section. As I said when we started, that'll take us at this point about 45 minutes to walk you through it so you know what to be prepared for and what to see. But the rest of the presentation goes through all the other possible scenarios. And again, this will be available for you if you want to download it or take a look at it after we're done tonight. So, whoops, let's go back. Sorry. I hit the wrong button. Give me 1 second. So what I'd like to do, as I said, is walk through the sort of typical process that most of you will go through, and that is a dependent student invites a parent. But before we do that, just a little bit of an overview. So as I said, this is screenshots to help you take a look at what it might look like. And the FAFSA was online, as we said, December of 2023. Couple pieces to note as you begin. First of all, everyone who completes the FAFSA will need an FSA ID. An FSA ID is a combination of a username and a password, much like you'd have to log into your credit card or your bank or your email. You'll need a username and a password. What's important is that anyone who provides information on the FAFSA needs their own FSA ID. So a student will need an FSA ID. A parent, if they're providing information on the FAFSA, will need a separate FSA ID. And if a student is married, a spouse might need an FSA ID. It's possible another parent might need an FSA ID, and we'll talk about that as we go on tonight. As you can see, even if you don't have a Social Security number, if you're a parent, you can still create an FSA ID and access the form. The FSA ID is the way you prove who you are, and the best advice is to get your FSA ID between 1 and 3 days before you attempt the FAFSA. The reason for that is because the FSA ID is a process that confirms your identity. It goes through and matches you against the Social Security Administration database or the Department of Homeland Security database to prove that you're a U.S. citizen and to prove your name, your date of birth, and your Social Security number match. The reason that's important is because the FAFSA is going to actually ping against the IRS database and bring your tax information over automatically. It's a much better FAFSA than in the past for those of you who might have done a FAFSA in the past. So that automatically your IRS information will transfer, but they have to prove who you are first. So that FSA match process, the FSA ID process is required first, and then 1 to 3 days later, you can go through and create your or complete your FAFSA. Secondly, the FAFSA is what's defined as a roles-based form. So what that means is that when you log in, you will say, I'm a student or I'm a parent, and you'll have access to just the information and questions that are relevant to you. If you've done a FAFSA in the past, as a parent or maybe as a student, you'll know that in the past it was one form and you could see every question. In this new redesign, it is one form, but each person logs in separately and does their section of the form. Once all of that is done, then you can submit the FAFSA and it will be sent to colleges and universities that you specify. Number three, there's this new term that we need to define and understand. It's called a contributor. So normally you might think a contributor is providing money. That's not what it means in this context. What it means for the FAFSA is who's providing information. So if you're providing information on the FAFSA, you're considered a contributor. And what's important about that is that you need to, as a contributor, provide consent and sign your section of the FAFSA for that section to be considered complete. And we'll look at that as we go through the application together. So again, we'll look at these pieces as we go. What I want to do is actually launch in. And one last piece before we begin. It says dependent students, and we'll talk about what that means. Dependent students must invite their parents to contribute to their form if parent information is required. So again, we're going to start from a student perspective, see what a student does, and then talk about how they might invite their parent to come in and be part of this process. So let's log in. First of all, to find the FAFSA, you would go to studentaid.gov. Again, studentaid.gov. And on the studentaid.gov page, you'll see the FAFSA form listed. When you go to the FAFSA form page, you'll see this logo and this link and the ID for start a new form for 24-25 FAFSA. And that's where you'll begin the application as a student. You'll then log in using your FSA ID. If you don't have an FSA ID yet, you can click on create an account, and that will actually help you go through the process to set up your FSA ID. And that's the piece, again, you want to do 1 to 3 days before you log in to do the rest of the FAFSA. Both you as a student should do it, and at least one parent should do it as well. By the way, if you have an FSA ID from before, so let's say as a parent you did a FAFSA for another student or a sibling, you don't have to create a new FSA ID. You can use the same FSA ID that you used the last time. It's not a new thing. It is more robust, but it's not a new thing. So if you have one, you can still use it. So once you log in, you then choose if you're a student or a parent. Remember, I talked about a roles-based form. This is where you would choose, hey, I'm the student if you're the student logging in, and we're going to begin this application. So then there are a series of videos that will play for you that walk you through what is a FAFSA, why are you doing this, and some key information. So the first video is what's a FAFSA, why it's important. The second video defines what a contributor is and tells you what documents you might need to have in front of you as you start working on the application. The third video tells you what to expect when you complete your form. It defines consent and approval. It tells you how much time doing the form might take. I will tell you, it says an hour. It should not take you an hour. That's a maximum number of amount of time. I know I work in the profession. I did a FAFSA. It took me 10 minutes. Now, again, I have a little more background than you might, but it's not an hour-long process, unless there might be some conditions that make it that. But for most people, it will be a fairly quick and easy process. And then number 4, what happens after you submit a FAFSA? There's a video that will walk you through sort of the next steps, how the information is transferred to your college, and how the college will be in touch with you with any questions or information. So once you go through those 4 videos, the first page that comes up verifies the identity of the student that has typed in their student FSA ID and password. And in this case, we're going to talk about Raya Tran. So Raya is our student. Her date of birth is February 3rd, 2003. You can see her contact information. This is a sample student. There is no real Raya Tran, but this is an example of what you might see. If the information's wrong, then this student can actually log in and correct their information on studentaid.gov. So now we jump right into the questions, and this very first one is the very first one that confuses students. So I'm just going to talk about this. And by the way, as we go through tonight, a lot of these questions will repeat for parents as well. So when I talk about them from the student perspective, I'm going to give you some context and advice on the parent side also, so you can take notes about both, and it will speed up our evening so we don't have to do the same thing twice. But for example, on this question, student state of legal residence, this one confuses students to no end, in part because they wonder if they've been born in the state they're living in and they've never moved anywhere else, what date do they put down? So in that case, they should put down their date of birth. So there's no problem with that. And in fact, most states are looking for 1 to 3 years of residence to qualify for their state scholarship. That's why that's there, or potentially to qualify for in-state tuition at an in-state institution. So if you were born in the state of Florida, you live in the state of Florida, you would put that down. If you moved to Massachusetts 3 years ago, you would put the month and date that you moved to Massachusetts 3 years ago as a student. For parents, and this also causes confusion, unless parents moved together to the state, for parents, when they answer this question, it's one question. It doesn't ask about your mom's date versus your dad's date. So in that situation, they would use the older of the two, or the more back in the past of the two, the longer residency. But again, as long as it's 1 to 3 years or more, it doesn't really matter. If you have questions about the eligibility for your state, you'll want to contact your state financial aid scholarship agency to find out what is the term of residence that's required. In the state of Florida, it is a year before you start enrollment, but different states have different rules. So the very next page is this concept of consent. And I want to talk a little bit about consent. So consent from the taxpayer is required from the contributor. So if you're the student, you have to say, I agree to let you pull my tax information from the IRS, even if I don't have a record. Even if the IRS, I never filed a tax return, I have to give permission for the FAFSA system to go and check with the IRS to make sure there's no tax information. So consent is required. If the student or parent refuses to provide consent, then no financial aid is available. Let me say that again. If the student or parent refuses to provide consent, then they cannot qualify for federal, state, or institutional financial aid. Really important that consent be given. And again, this is not consent to pay. No one's going to require the parent or student to pay anything. This is just consent to share your information. So at the bottom of this page, you'll see an approve. You'll also see a decline. If you were to hit decline, you would then have a series of messages saying, are you sure? Are you really sure? Because you have to understand this will take away your aid eligibility. But you do have to affirmatively provide consent for this to move forward. Okay, so now we turn to personal circumstances. And we're going to see in a moment that this is sort of a signpost that helps you see where you are in the application form. If you click continue, you'll see then it shows you there are 5 sections for the application, and we're in section number 1. And again, remember, we're looking at this from the student perspective. So you'll see as we go through, as we signpost each section, as we go along, where we are in the application. Remember, by the way, up to this point, every question that's been asked is a question that every student will receive, whether they're a 50-something-year-old going to grad school, a 40-something-year-old going to a med school, or a 17-year-old going on to college. Everyone's going to see the same questions to this point. So the very first question that's asked is student's marital status in this section. And it says, what is your marital status as a student? Remember, it's student marital status. So Raya is single. She answers single. If it was me doing this form, I would say I'm married, and that would tell the FAFSA, hey, this is an independent student. So as a result, I'm not going to need parental information. But the next questions are going to go through and identify that Raya is not independent. We do need parents' information. But again, just as a reminder, if your situation is different, this is where you will identify that as you go through the form. The next question says, what year in college are you or will you be when you start your college career in 24, 25, or continue your college career? And just a piece of advice here, there are two stumbling blocks that cause students some confusion. The first is lots of our students, because of dual enrollment or other advanced placement opportunities, start college with some credit already. If that is true, they are still a first year. You don't want to choose anything other if you're an incoming student for the first time at a college level. The other question that causes some confusion, and some of you will laugh when I say this, is sometimes our students get a little ambitious, and when they're asked if they have a bachelor's degree, they think that their high school diploma is their bachelor's degree. It is not. A high school diploma is not a bachelor's. If you answered yes to this question, do you already have your bachelor's degree? You're automatically turning yourself off from several kinds of financial aid. So you only want to answer yes if you truly already have your first undergraduate degree. And again, most of our students will not when they start college. The next page asks about some dependent student personal circumstances. And these are circumstances, again, that will make a student independent, meaning we don't need parental information. Chances are, for most traditionally aged 17 or 18-year-olds, they're going to answer all of these as blank. But if, for example, and I'll go through the list, if one of these is true, then that student would be independent. And the list includes, are you on active duty? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Do you have children or other dependents of your own that you provide more than half of their support? Are you an orphan? Are you a ward of the court? Are you in foster care? Are you a legally emancipated minor? Or are you in legal guardianship with someone other than your parents? So if the student can answer yes to any of those questions, the student is considered independent and no parental information will be required. In Raya's case, the answer is no, none of these apply. So she's going to answer none of these apply and move on. Again, we're still in this section 1, and we're still trying to understand, is Raya dependent or independent? So the very next question that's asked is, are you, as a student, unaccompanied, meaning you don't live with your parents, so you're living by yourself, and either homeless, or do you pay your own bills, are you self-supporting, and at risk of being homeless? So this is trying to get to our homeless student population, right? And we're not talking about, again, families that are homeless. We're talking about unaccompanied students that are homeless. In that situation, if you answered yes, the next question we'll ask, in what way can you document that? Are you a McKinney-Vento provider? Is there someone who can document that for you? Do you need to talk to a financial aid officer? And you can choose, are you at a shelter? You can choose a number of different options to identify how or in what ways you can document your status. And if you don't have a way to document, then you can always talk to a financial aid officer as the last resort as well. But in Raya's case, she has answered no. So again, she is still so far a dependent student. Homeless students are considered independent. And again, if they're unsupported, unaccompanied, there is no parental information required. Okay, with all of that said, it feels probably like we spent an hour just on independent status. But with all of that said, the last piece here is there may be situations where there's something unusual that's going on with the family. So perhaps the student has left home because of abuse or a threatening environment, or there's abandonment issues, or something has gone on inside the home that has caused an irrevocable breakdown in the parent-student dynamic. That's what we call unusual circumstances. If that is true for the student, they would check yes, and they would be considered what's called provisionally independent, and they'd have to document those circumstances with one of the colleges they apply to for financial aid. But in Raya's case, it is not true, so she's going to answer no. But in your case, if that is true, that is how you document. You would say, yes, there is something going on in my family that doesn't fit neatly into any of the boxes so far. And so I'm saying yes here. But again, in Raya's case, the answer is no. So all that said, the result is Raya is a dependent student. Now, this is the question that tricked many, many families. So I want to make sure that we're clear on this question. The very next piece says, are your parents unwilling to provide their information, you, the student, um, but you don't have any unusual circumstances? So why would we ask that question? Well, sometimes a parent might say to a student, hey, I know you're going off to college, but I'm not providing any support for you, and I'm not even going to fill out your FAFSA. So a couple things I'll say here, right? If that is the case, or you as a student are struggling, or if you as a parent are struggling with this question, what I would say to you is the following. Remember, filling out the FAFSA doesn't obligate you to pay anything. It's just a way to measure if the student is eligible for financial aid. So if an objection from a parent is, I don't want to pay for college, so I'm not going to do the FAFSA, those two things are not connected, right? Doing the FAFSA is just figuring out if a student is eligible for aid. Paying for college is a whole different question. But let's say a parent still refuses to complete the FAFSA. If that is the case, a student can qualify for a small, unsubsidized loan called the unsubsidized direct loan. And if you want to do that, you would say yes on this question. Most of you do not want to say yes, right? Most of you will have information parents can provide, so you will say no and click continue. But for the few students where that is the case, this is an option here. Okay, so the last section here, now that we've determined that the student is dependent, is to find out who their parents are. And this introduces something called the parent wizard. So I'm going to talk you through the three, you see one question on the screen, but I'm going to talk through the three questions you'll see that will help you identify which parent is the parent you're going to complete the FAFSA with. So in Raya's situation, her parents are married to each other. And when it says parent, it means the legal, biological, or adoptive parent. So the two parents that gave birth to Raya, mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, they are still married to each other. So they are the parents for this purpose. And they will be the ones who complete the FAFSA. But let's say your situation's different. Let's say your parents are not married to each other. If you answer no, the next question you will see on the FAFSA is, are your parents unmarried and living together? So let's say Raya's parents didn't get married. They had a kid together. You know, marriage is an old concept. They just decided we're not going to be married, but we're going to live together and raise our kid together. If that is the case, Raya's mom and dad would still fill out the FAFSA together. If your parents are unmarried and living together, it doesn't matter. It's still considered a family unit. Everyone would complete the FAFSA. That's number two. So again, first question, are your parents married to each other? Second questions, are they unmarried and living together? So if you answer no to both of those questions, the third question will ask you which parent provided you most financial support over the last 12 months, right? And this is an important question. So over the last 12 months, who paid your bills as a student? Who provided you housing? Who paid for your food? Who gave you money? Who is it that provides more of your support over the last 12 months? Which parent? Which is that mom? Is that dad? Is that who is it? So once you pick that parent, by the way, it doesn't ask who earns more money, doesn't ask is mom better off than dad, does mom have a house and dad rents one, doesn't ask any of that. All it asks is who provided more financial support. Once you choose that parent, that's the parent who provides then all the answers on the FAFSA. So what if they provide an equal amount? Or what if both parents provide no financial support to you? What do you do in that case? Then you're asked to choose the parent who earns more or has more assets. Notice, by the way, never does it ask who claims you on a tax return. It doesn't ask who you live with. What it asks is who provides more financial support. That's the parent you will complete the FAFSA with. If that parent is remarried, so again, I'll give you an example. So my child is Rachel. My name is Daniel. My wife's name is Rebecca. Rebecca and I divorced. and I have remarried. I've remarried Colleen. So Colleen and I are a couple. We provide more of Rachel's financial support. So, or I do. So I'm going to be the parent chosen, and because Colleen and I are married, it's going to be Colleen and my information that goes on the FAFSA. We'll never ask about Rebecca because she is not part of the family that provides more financial support. So it's important to understand how that plays out. If you have questions, do feel free to type them in the Q&A, and one of our experts can help you on that. But that's how that process works. So once you've defined who your parents are, and again, this is really the student who defines this. No one's going to come back and confirm it. It's the student who has to say, this is the situation I live in. It will then ask you to provide information about this parent. Now, here's another tricky part of the FAFSA, and I want to highlight this for you as well. So most of us know our parent's name, I hope, although we'll talk about that too. Some of us know our parents' date of birth. I bet most of us do not know our parents' social security number. And what you'll see here is that what's required, remember, this is the student typing this in. What's required is the name of the parent's date of birth, and the parent's social security number. Now, this is really important. I know in many cases, parents don't share their social security number with their students. In fact, I don't think I even learned what my social security number was until I started to apply for college, because that's when I first had to write it over and over and over again. But what's important about this form is that this combination of information, social security number and date of birth, will be used to match the parent and to make sure the parent identity is confirmed. So you need to make sure to type this information in correctly. What happened? Well, a lot of students who started the FAFSA came to this question, didn't have their parents' SSN, and read the answer underneath the SSN box that says, my parent doesn't have an SSN. Well, they thought, I don't have my parents' social number with me, so that must be what I answer. No, you don't want to answer that. You need to get your parents' social security number and write it in here to make sure the invitation goes correctly. You also want to make sure that you write, and this is true throughout the application, you write your complete first and last name. So again, to be clear, this is not your nickname. This is also the name that appears on your legal documents. So for example, if you live in a Hispanic family and you use a combination of Garcia de Ramon as your last name, for example, you want to make sure that you match whatever is on your social security card. If your social security card says Garcia, then Garcia is the last name. If the social security card says Ramon, then Ramon is the last name. If it says Garcia de Ramon, then that is the last name. Whatever is going to match, it's really important that be entered so that you make sure to match that information. Also, what's important is the email address be entered correctly. So you'll see once you, as Raya, enter your parents' information and click send invite, immediately mom will be sent an invite to complete her section of the form. You'll also notice that Raya only put one. The reason for that is because at least one parent's information is required, maybe both. And let's talk about why maybe both. When you'll need both parents' information is when there are different tax records with the IRS. So remember, the whole point of the FAFSA is to match your information with the IRS to make this easier for you. If you and your spouse, as parents, file a joint tax return, then only one of you needs to complete the FAFSA. So my wife and I, we file married filing jointly. So when I do my FAFSA for my kid, only one of us has to do the FAFSA because my information can go out and match to the IRS and it will pull the whole record down. I don't need my wife to do it as well. But let's say we file married filing separately. So one of us does one tax return, one of us does another, or one of us files as head of household, or maybe one of us files a return and the other one doesn't, or maybe neither of us file a tax return. If any of those situations occur, then you're going to have two different possible tax records at the IRS. So we're going to need information on both parents because, again, we need to go match against the IRS and see if there's information to be had. And the only way to do that is to match against each individual. So again, if married filing jointly, one tax record, one parent. But if they're separate tax records, each parent has to match it. Now, in Raya's case, it makes it really easy. She's got one tax record for both parents, so she can just put the information about the one parent. I should also tell you what year. So for the 24-25 FAFSA year, we're looking at your 2022 taxes. We're always looking at the prior year. So not the year before, but the year before the year before. Feels a little bit like time travel. So for 24-25, we're looking at 2022 information. For next year, 25-26, we'll look at 2023 information, and so on. But it's important to understand what year we're looking at. Okay, so now we move to the next section of the form. That was a lot for that first section. The rest of this goes really quickly in relation to what we just talked about. So we've got student demographics. These are all optional questions. They're here for classification purposes, but the student doesn't have to answer them. What is the student's gender? What is the student's ethnicity? Is the student of Hispanic, Latin, or Latino, or Latinx, or Spanish origin? What's the student's race? And then finally, this one's not optional, but what is the student's citizenship status? So just a word about this. Reminder that a student has to be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen to receive federal financial aid. And if you're not clear what an eligible non-citizen is, there's the best way to look for this is to do a Google search on the term FAFSA and eligible non-citizen. You can find lots of information, but essentially this is mostly people who are here as a permanent resident or have a green card, that's sort of the old term, or people who might be here under a waiver or as a refugee or a asylee or a parolee. There are lots of different options, or here because of violence against women. There are lots of different options that might qualify someone for an eligible non-citizen. And remember, it's the student citizenship that matters, not the parents. So as long as the student is a citizen, their parents could be non-citizens and they could still qualify for federal financial aid. So it's the student citizenship that matters. The next question asks about your parents' educational status. This is really used mostly for tracking purposes. Some state scholarships, some private institutions or public institutions might want to know if you're a first generation student. That really is what this is about. The next question asks if your parent was killed in the line of duty, either in serving as a public service officer or in the armed forces after 9/11. If that is true, then there's some certain benefits that accrue to you having to do with the Pell Grant, but for most families, that answer is going to be a no. If it's yes, be prepared to provide information to the college documenting the information and circumstances around that. The next question says, what is your high school completion status as a student? So did you graduate with a high school diploma? Do you have a GED? Or you homeschooled? This is important for tracking because you must have a high school diploma or equivalent to be able to get federal financial aid. And then now it's going to ask you to search what high school did you graduate. And this is a pretty easy search process. You just type in the state, the city, and it will give you information about the high schools available. You select your school and you move on. So the next section is the finances section. So again, if you're keeping track, we're in section number 3. Personal circumstances we've done, demographics we've done, we're now to financials. And this used to be one of the hardest sections of the form. Now it's actually one of the easiest sections of the form, assuming you can match with the IRS. And again, what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to highlight the questions that will show up on both sides, parent and student, so you're prepared for them. But most of the income information is just going to be automatically transferred from the IRS, so that really it's only asking for exceptions. And this confuses parents and students because they're wondering, where do they enter their information? You don't have to, because it mostly is happening behind the scenes for you. The 3 questions you'll see here, number 1, how much of your pension did you roll over into an IRA or other qualified plan? So let's talk about that for a second. First of all, not many students have a pension, but this question will also show up on the parent side. So let's say you moved money from one pension plan to another. That money is going to show up on your 2022 tax return. So it's important that we understand in the financial aid office that's not money really that you earned or had available to spend. It's money you moved from one plan to another. So the reason that's there is to help us understand that and eliminate that when we do an analysis of how much you can contribute. So that's why that question's there. The next one also confuses a bunch of families. This says the amount of college grants or scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits that you reported as income to the IRS. Remember that most grants and scholarships are tax free. This is asking for grants and scholarships that you paid tax on. Generally, and I'm not an accountant, I don't play one on TV, so take this for what it's worth, but generally, the amount of money you're going to have to pay tax on from your scholarship or grant is the amount that was greater than your tuition, your fees, perhaps some living expenses. But again, you will have reported those as part of your income. In most cases, most families won't have that. So for most families, that should be zero. It's the rare case where a family got their entire undergraduate degree covered with grant. And in that case, there may be some amount reported here, but it's generally probably nothing. The last question here asks about foreign earned income exclusion. So let's talk about that. So that applies only if you are living or working abroad and filling a US tax return, but you already paid taxes on the income you earned abroad. So I'll give you an example. So let's say that I am a US citizen, and I file a US tax return, and I have some bank accounts and other things here in the US, but I'm living in London and I'm paid by a British company in London. Well, I file British taxes and I actually pay British taxes. So it would be unfair for me to pay taxes on that twice, once to the British government and once to the US government. So the US says, okay, well, we'll allow you to deduct the amount of income you earned abroad from your taxes as you walk it through. But that really is income. So we need to know that that really is income here because it is income you earn. So that's why it's listed here because it will be removed from your adjusted gross income, but we need to add it back to reflect that that is true income you earned. Again, most of you aren't going to have that, but that's what that is. That's it for income questions. Again, on the student side, there are 3 asset questions, and I just want to highlight these for you. First of all, note that the one asset that many families have, that's probably the largest asset they have, is not listed, and that is your home. So we never ask about your home. We never ask about your retirement. Both parents and students, nothing is asked about for the amount you have saved in retirement or the amount you have in your home. What we do ask about is cash and savings. So this is as of the date you file the form. And in this case, Raya has $500 in her cash account. If Raya were to own a business, Raya doesn't own a business, but if she did, how much the property invested in that business or farm is worth. So if you as a parent own a business or farm, it's how much you could get for the actual assets in that business or farm that would be reported here. And last is other real estate or other investments. This would include things like stocks and bonds. It would include things like rental properties you own or other kinds of investments. Again, right now we're looking at the student side. You'll see the same thing on the parent side. Again, most students are not going to have much of this, but they may have some small cash or savings. Note that for investments, it does not include retirement. So, if you're like me, I have some stock accounts, but my stock accounts are all in a 401k. They're retirement assets. I would not report them here because they're not investments that I'm going to report on this application. That's it for the financial section. We move now to the college section. This is where the student selects the colleges, which is really the last part of the FAFSA for the student before we turn to the parent. And again, we'll go through the parent stuff pretty quickly. But here's the college page. On the college page, again, you can search by school name, or actually you can search by school code. Every college has a 6-digit school code they can provide you to enter. Couple of points here. Number one, you can list up to 20 schools. And a lot of families make the mistake and say, well, I can't list a school until I've applied for admission or until I've been accepted for admission. That is not true. You can list any school on the FAFSA, even if you haven't applied yet for admission, or even if you haven't yet been accepted. You want to go ahead and list them and get your FAFSA completed so the information is there for that institution. And you can look up by school code or look up by school name and add up to 20 schools on the FAFSA. And in this case, the students added 4, and we move on. So the last thing, and this is also very important, a lot of students think, okay, I'm done. I got to here, I'm going to close it out. No, you have to sign the application. You're not done until you submit your signature. So this section allows you to review what answers you provided. It tells you who the contributor is. And then the very last thing is sign and complete your application. So you go through as a student, you click and say, I agree to the terms, I click sign, and I am now done with my section of the form as a student. Now, remember, in the meantime, the parent's been sent an invitation. We're going to go through that section in a moment, but this just is a tracking method to say you're done with your section. So, what's going to happen on Raya's mom's side? Raya's mom is going to get an email that looks something like this that says, help complete Raya's form. That email was sent to Raya's mom as soon as Raya said send invitation. So from that point, Raya's mom can log in and start her section of the application. And much of this is going to look very similar. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly, but she can just log in immediately. If she doesn't get the email, maybe Raya typed the wrong email address or there was some problem, Raya's mom can also just log in at studentaid.gov and say, I'm a parent and I want to complete my parent section. And she can search for Raya's FAFSA there as well. But hopefully it worked out correctly. Raya entered in the right information. Again, remember that Raya's mom has to have her own FSA ID. So if not, she can click create an account. And you're going to see just a reminder of why you're doing this. So Raya wants your help on a FAFSA form. Do you want to accept or decline the invitation? She's going to click accept. It says, are you sure? You're going to use the information we have. Make sure to click continue. And you continue and it moves on. Now, much of this is going to look very familiar because again, we've got the 1, 2, 3, and 4 videos we saw before. We've got the same page that confirms Raya's mom's identity. We've got the consent. So again, Raya's mom's going to provide consent. And now we're to parent demographics. So again, it moves very much like the student side of the application. You can see, unlike Raya, who had 5 sections, Raya's mom only has 3 sections: demographics, financials, and signature. So it's going to move pretty quick. So Raya's mom is asked to confirm her marital status. We talked about this. She is married, not separated. So she's going to click yes. That's true. She's asked about her state of legal residence. Again, reminder that we're going to use the older date. And here we go. That's it for demographics. Now we're into parent finances. Again, remember, much of the information is going to be automatically transferred over. The very first question asks about your access or whether you received federal benefits. And the reason we ask this question is to see if you qualify for simplified needs test around asset and using assets or not, but it's not going to help. It's not going to hurt your financial aid application, rather, to click yes on any of these. But if you as a parent received any of these benefits, you would click on them and move forward. In Raya's mom's case, the answer is none of these apply. So this page says, did you file a 2022 IRS form? Raya's parents did. And this next question is, did you or will you file that 2022 joint tax return with your current spouse? Now, remember, we talked about this before. Why is that question here? Because let's say the answer was no, right? Then the question would be, well, we need that second parent's information separately, right? And that might prompt a second contributor to be involved. There also may be situations where, let's say in 2022, God forbid, you were married, but someone passed away in 23. So in that situation, if you answer no and you're widowed, the FAFSA will prompt you to enter in by hand your portion of your income from 2022. Or let's say you were married in 2022 and now you're divorced. Same situation, will ask you to enter by hand your income information. In Raya's mom's case, it's basically the same. Her marital status has not changed. But if the answer for you is that it has changed, be prepared. It may ask for you to do some manual entry. The next question asks about family size. And it says, is your family size different than what you claimed on your 2022 tax return? And they've answered yes in this case. And let's talk about that for a second. So let's say, for example, there are um, four people in the family, as Rye's family has here. But on the tax return, they actually answered three because Raya's older sibling is old enough that they don't claim her as a child on the tax return anymore, but they still provide more than half of her support. In that situation, she would be answered here as an extra child to be added in. But in most cases, you're not going to have a difference between what's on your tax return and what you're going to put on the FAFSA. But you might if, for example, maybe you have a new child, maybe there's a new baby born in the family, or something is different from 2022. You can answer yes and change it if that's the case. The next question asks how many of your people in your family were in college or are planning on being in college in 24-25. This is just for information. It's not used in the formula, but it's here as an information piece. So now we're to the parents' tax information. Again, it's pretty easy. Some of these questions will look very familiar. Pension rollover, we talked about. College grants and scholarships, we talked about. Foreign earned income, we talked about. There is one new question, which is did you receive the earned income credit? Earned income credit is a tax credit that is reserved for families with children of the lowest income quintiles. So if you have it, it would show up on your tax return, and you would know that. It's given to you as an offset against taxes owed, so you might get a refund. But if you have it, it would show up on your tax return. So they're asking you to confirm if you do, in fact, have it. So now we're to the parent assets section. Again, much of this looks the same. Cash, savings and checking, business and farm, other real estate or other investments. The one difference is this number here that says annual child support received. So remember, this is for the parent. If the parent got child support, received child support, it asks you for the last complete calendar year to enter the amount of that child support. So remember, it is now 2024. So if you did receive child support, it would be the amount you received in child support in 2023. Remember, your tax information is coming from 2022, but this answer is coming in 2023. And it's how much you received, not how much you were owed, but how much you actually received in child support in the calendar year of 2023. The last piece is to provide information on who the other parent is, and that is just for informational purposes. And then you are complete. So again, the parent now has to review their section, sign and complete it, because again, until they do that, they're not done. They have to sign and complete their section of the form. And from that piece, we get a congratulations note to say that you have received your FAFSA, it is complete, and the student will get an email to say that it has been processed. Now, what's important, we're gonna end this here. What's important is I want to show you a couple of next steps, specifically with what we're talking about tonight, give you instructions, and talk to you about an opportunity you have. So, tonight you registered for this program. It's part of our National Family FAFSA Family Guide sessions. And again, these links will be mailed to you tomorrow. So don't worry about necessarily copying them down, but I'm going to paste them in the chat. So this is the link to the web page that talks to you about, it has a link to the FSA ID. It also has a copy of the PowerPoint that I shared with you tonight. It has the email address, fafsaguidance@gmail.com, if you have questions after this evening. And remember, if you do your FAFSA now and you have not done one before, and you submit proof of that, you can receive a $20 Amazon gift card for doing your FAFSA after this evening. And I'm going to give you that again. This link will be emailed to you, so you'll have it for proof. But for the FAFSA $20, what we will need is a copy of the email from the Department of Ed confirming that you in fact have done your section. We'll ask you for your name, email address, phone number, and then here's what the email will look like. It will be an email from the department that says, we've received your FAFSA form. If you save that email on your device, PDF preferred, and upload that, We will then turn around and get back to you a $20 Amazon gift card. Now, there is one other piece that I want to talk to you about, which is a great possibility for those of you who might be interested. And that is, as part of our process, we are hoping not just to have families do their FAFSA, but we're also hoping to train financial aid advisors, to train advisors who might be willing to work with families in their neighborhood, people they know who have not yet completed a FAFSA. And if you do that, if you, as a student or parent, know 10 other people who need to complete a FAFSA and you can convince them to do their FAFSA, you can receive, for every 10 students who complete a FAFSA, a $500 stipend, again, for each group of 10 students. So you would have to find the students, their families, help them complete the FAFSA, have them give you a copy of that confirmation. And what that will do is that will get you a $500 stipend. Again, all of this funding is coming via the federal government for their funding of this outreach effort. We are doing FAFSA advisor trainings. We're doing one tomorrow night, you can see, and one more on July 20th. But it's basically what we did tonight. We're going to go through the FAFSA line by line. And to share with you, here is the advisor form. Again, and I'll paste this in the chat as well. So you have a link to that. If you can work on getting 10 families to complete their FAFSA, their 24-25 FAFSA, that is the link to that application information. So with that, I just want to show you one more thing, and then we will stop for questions and conversation. So if you do have a question, please do feel free to type that in the Q&A. The one other thing I do want to show you is corrections. So I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes people might make a mistake. So what happens if you make a mistake on your FAFSA? What do you do next? So if that is the case, you can log back in and complete a correction. When you complete your FAFSA, you will be taken or given something called the FAFSA submission summary. And that shows you what you have provided, what information you've given. It shows you what financial aid you might qualify for. It shows you this number called the Student Aid Index number, which is a number that we use in the financial aid offices to help build your financial aid offer. And you'll see the FAFSA form answers and a blue button here that says make a correction. So that correction might be, hey, you know what? I put the wrong information down from my mom. Or, hey, you know what? I actually forgot to include a college that I meant to include, or whatever it might be. You can make a correction and submit that correction back to the institution. You will also see some information about the schools you've applied to. What's their graduation rate? What's their retention rate? Etc. And it does give you information about next steps. So again, just want to highlight for you that that information is available for you as well. So with that, that is really our information for this evening. I told you we'd be done at about 8:15 with your questions. It is 8:04, so I think I kept to my promise. I'd love to hear if you have questions or if there's any other questions you would like us to answer for you. Now is your chance. We'll give you a second to type any question you might have in the chat. A reminder, we will send you a copy of tonight's recording. We will send you a copy of a link to the two forms I showed you. And a reminder that FAFSA does have to be completed every year. Typically, it would open on October 1st, so you want to get this year's FAFSA done, but then don't forget that very soon there'll be a time or an opportunity for you to do FAFSA for your next year for the 25-26 academic year. Any other questions or comments that I can answer, feel free. I want to thank one of my friends from a financial aid office who is actually in the audience tonight. And, you know, again, I want to thank her. She's done a fantastic job of leading the Better FAFSA face group, which some of you may be on, which is actually how we've been doing advertising out about this presentation. But if you know friends or family members who could benefit from this session, we're doing this 2 more times for parents. Saturday, July 20th, and Tuesday, August 6th. Um, so please feel free to connect in. I do have a question. I'm able to submit my FAFSA. I completed everything, but I don't see a submit button. Again, you won't see a submit button. What you'll see is a signature button. So once you sign the application, click the box that you sign it, and that will be the complete application. If you're not sure, you can log back in to check the status of your application, and that will tell you where you are as well. If you go in and check the status of your FAFSA, you can do that right on studentaid.gov. So if it says in progress, that's probably because your parent hasn't done their section, or if you're the parent, you haven't done, maybe the student hasn't done their section, or the other parent hasn't done their section. In progress means that it's somewhere before the application can be completed. So remember, it is separate sections, one for student, one for parent. All of that has to be done before it can be submitted as a whole. My thought would be that your parent may not have actually finished their section. They might not have signed it and submitted it on their end. So I would just confirm with them, have them go back in. Or it could be that because of taxes, right? If your parents don't file taxes together, maybe one parent did it, but the other parent hasn't done their section yet. So you want to check that out. Lastly, let me also do this for you all. I am going to give you my email address. So you can feel free to reach out to the FAFSA guidance email. I'm also going to give you my email. So don't be shy. If you have questions after tonight, feel free to email. I'm going to give you my Gmail address. It is really easy. It's just my first initial, my last name. So dbarkowitz@gmail.com. Feel free to email me with questions after tonight if you have questions. And with that, Tron, I think we can stop our recording for the evening.